second tape, continuing a conversation with the artist Ejan Bao in his home and studio in Oakland, California on September 15th, 2012. Uh, I am Mark Johnson, professor at San Francisco State, here with.
Stephen Wong, Chinese American Museum curator.
So, since we left the story hanging, I wanted to come back uh, to your marriage to Billy. And did you stay married long?
Well, it was an interesting story. I went to teach at University of Texas by myself because it was a marriage of arrangement. But in my first year there, she found me and she said that she wanted to come and live with me, which, wasn't part of our arrangement. And she said, after all, we're married. But we're only married technically. So I said, well, I don't think this is possible. First of all, I didn't know who she was. We just did it. And she said, well, in that case, I want a divorce. So she filed the papers. I went to a chief divorce lawyer. We went to court. And the divorce lawyer says, this is a very emotional moment for you. You won't know what you're saying, so follow my lead. If I nod my head like this, say yes. If I go like this, say no. So they swear me in. He says, is your name so-and-so? And I said, yes. Is your wife Billy? Yes. Do you love her? And he's shaking his head. I said, no. And he rushes to the judge with the papers. He says she agreed to everything. He doesn't love her. And the judge goes, bang, divorce granted. Meanwhile, there were all these families in the background getting divorced. Everybody was crying. And this was a very weird experience. Because mine was a little bit of a farce. And I haven't seen her in 30 years. And finally, when I was living in Alameda, she called me. She found me. And she came to my apartment in Alameda. And because 30 years had passed, I didn't recognize her. So I sat down in a corner and asked her what she was doing. And it turns out that she's into hiking, she's into nature, she's a scientist, she's an environmentalist. And I lit a cigarette and I was thinking, oh, I hate hiking, I hate nature. We're exactly the opposites. Yet she found me. And it was a very strange experience. This is 30 years later, because I couldn't even recognize her. People look different. And for a while I thought that she might not be Billy because she kept saying, do you remember this? Do you remember that? And I didn't. You've forgotten these things. But I haven't seen her since.
Did
Yes.
she have that whole what happened and what transpired is really fascinating to me. Do you think you of course did it to become a resident,
Yes.
become a citizen?
Yes.
Do you think there were some feelings on her part?
There was a little bit because she was very pretty, and she was telling me that she was having a very difficult time with men because they were grabbing at her and wanting sex all the time, and I wasn't that way. I was more of a gentleman. And I said, that's true because I want something from you, which is my immigration papers. I said, this is not really me, it's me faking it because I want this favor. But she didn't believe that. She said, oh, that's part of your honesty, blah, blah, blah. So she had some attraction. But for my part, I came from such a turbulent family that my mother was kind of awful. So I grew up not trusting women. So I was afraid of that kind of heavy commitment. Because our family was, I think, disturbed. They didn't have a happy marriage. So I looked at marriage as really as a death sentence. And I didn't realize at that time, but I had a distrust of women, which later on made life very complicated. You know, and it was a little bit useless. You know, so in terms of personal relationships, I had a lot of girlfriends, but not for a very long time. And after a while, I discovered that I was a very bad actor because I would say different things, you know, for sex and for fun. And I wouldn't keep track of all the stupid things I said, and then they would catch me, you know, so that would end very quickly. So in all those years, I think I found, number one, that I had way too many girlfriends, and number two, I was a very bad actor.
Just for clarification too, do you mind actually telling us Billy's name?
Her name is Billy Lee Cox, but now she dropped the Billy. Now she goes by Lee Cox. And I always prefer Billy, you know, to Lee.
Let me adjust the mic really quick. There you go. Okay, perfect.
She was a scientist that got a PhD from Berkeley and spent most of her life doing research at different schools, and now she's an artist. She gave all that up, went to Santa Cruz for MFA in her 60s. And I don't know how she makes a living, but she lives somewhere near that area, being an artist.
And one other question I wanted to follow up on, even though earlier we were saying that you've spent a lot of time feeling sort of out of place.
Yes.
Although I know that you're, you know, very much beloved faculty at the California College of the Arts. And just before we began, we were talking about several people that you are close with in terms of feeling like you have good collegial friendships with on the faculty there and around the Bay Area. So do you feel like now you're in a place of feeling like you're very much a part of this community?
Well, more so in the Bay Area than any other town I lived in. But you know, you brought an interesting point. I do have a lot of good friends from, you know, Chicago when I lived there, and also my closest or oldest friend is somebody I grew up with from Uruguay. And because of him, we have connections to all our friends from Uruguay from childhood. And it's been really fun. His son got married last year in this little town called Ojai in Southern California. And there were about 20 Uruguayans that showed up of our class. So that's one aspect of Uruguay I really enjoy, is meeting your old school friends and keeping in touch with their soccer team, who's doing very well, and you know, keeping some of their traditions of eating, you know, these barbecues that are so famous there. And so that part of my life is very much alive. And, you know, I think also your relationships with good friends is something that brings me great joy. But it's nothing, I think for me the Bay Area is really interesting because of all the ethnic restaurants that you can go to. You know, you can get Laotian food, Cambodian food, Thai food, African food. And it's a more interesting place for me than other places I lived in. I mean, LA must be the same. because when I was in LA, I realized that LA is more dynamic than San Francisco. San Francisco is smaller and more the same, and LA has more immigrants and it's changing all the time. So in that sense, it's a little bit more dynamic.
I have a question about your work and supporters.
Yes.
Of your work. Who have been some of the kind of larger supporters throughout your career of your artwork?
Well, I think just friends. Although my friend in Boston, the guy that I grew up with, has bought a lot of work, and he's been emotionally and financially very steadfast. He was my main supporter. His name is Michael Chu. He married somebody in my class called Victoria Chu. And although she was in my same class, I didn't know her at that time, but since then she's become a major supporter, which is very strange because, his support comes out of years of friendship, and hers comes from her, which is wonderful. But other than that, I haven't had much success with galleries and that kind of stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? How has the commercial market received your work? I mean, you're saying that there hasn't been too much success, but also in Chicago, when you started doing the monkeys and the cars.
Yeah, that gallery, I had a very good gallery in Chicago that sold a lot. But she closed the gallery because it started losing money after the 80s. In the 80s, there was a boom in sales, I think, across the country, and it was very easy to sell, and then it all stopped for her. And after that, I had several galleries that did okay, but I think eventually, I left them or they kicked me out. And generally speaking, I haven't done as well commercially with galleries. And at the same time, I lost interest in all of that. I was more interested in pursuing my work. Because dealers, when they sell something, they want more of the same thing. And as an artist, you want a certain amount of progress. You don't want to do the same thing.
So I actually heard from someone that you would actually paint and reuse your canvases and paint over old paintings.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Which, as an artist, I understand. If it's an old body of work and you don't want to see it anymore, why waste money?
Right.
But it's interesting you brought up, the commercial success and commercial galleries that, in some ways they want to freeze you in time and have you produce. And so, it's not that, I'm assuming when a gallerist hears that you're painting over some old work, that probably gets them a little angry.
Yeah. I mean, some of these paintings, like for example, this horse painting, I think behind it there's 18 different paintings from 10, 15 years ago. It's the same frame because the wood frame was so good. So you sand it down. I mean, I did it because it was cheaper. You look at a painting, you say, oh, this is nowhere, so you just sand it out and start with a new surface.
That's great. That's a good story.
Are you sure you don't want any water?
I'm all right.
Oh, okay.
I'm all right. And so, can you tell us a little bit about your process then of not only what your work and some of the symbols and how you get some of the imagery, but what about this layering process? Is it part of your process that you build up, layers of 18 different paintings and sanding it down? Is that part of your process?
Well, I would say this, that the reason, what you actually go through is a lot of chaos, because you're trying to find an image. and you try various strategies, and as you're doing it, you realize that you're not getting to it. So you change your mind a lot. And I think what I've been looking for is an image that's strong enough to pull me out of my weakness, out of my lethargy. And something that is more transformative or more beautiful that can that will snatch you out of this kind of boredom. And so you do different things. It's very hard to describe because it's very chaotic. You know, you try to do multiple figures, it's not working. You try a single figure. You know, try different colors, that's not working. Try different backgrounds. You know, and eventually you come to something that makes sense. And generally speaking, you find it by accident. You don't find it because you want to. So I think the role of accident is a lot higher than what people give it credit to, because people say, oh, you got to work hard, you know, it's perseverance. But I think more of it that you luck into an image. You know, so the element of luck is high in my work. Does that make any sense?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, how big? I've noticed that with this body here, with a lot of the images from the Polaroids, they tend to be smaller scale.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Is there a reason why you tend to work smaller with the portraits, or when do you scale up?
Well, you know, when I was in Alameda, I had this really wonderful apartment with large screen doors, a patio. And it was very easy to do bigger work because I work with oils and it could ventilate it. But in this small apartment, I can't do it because it traps the turpentine, the mediums. So I've been doing smaller works. And I really have been enjoying the smaller things. You know, although when I was in Alameda, I loved the bigger things. And I suppose if I had a big studio, I would paint even larger. You know, but it's really a question of the fumes. But, you know, to me, it doesn't matter if it's big or small. It's all, painting is interesting by itself.
So I'm going to say again, we said we would maybe do another 15 minutes, but we just did another almost half an hour. Time flies, so it's about 90 minutes of conversation.
Maybe you can edit it.
Yes. No.
We want to thank you for
Oh, thank
this
you.
wonderful opportunity to be with you. It's been a great honor for us. We both admire your work very much.
Oh, for me too, because I never get interviewed. This is fun.
This is special for us.
Yeah,
Thank
for me too.
Do you mind if I actually take some pictures?
Go ahead.